and to the US itself. To be clear, the system is not perfect.
A 90-day pause for the people that didn't retaliate.
President Trump's announcement of the tariffs hit countries worldwide hard.
The European Union has said it is prepared to retaliate against President Trump's reciprocal tariffs. This News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer has more from London.
Italy's prime minister said they were just wrong, and Ireland's premier said there's no justification for them. But that trickle of criticism is surely going to become a deluge by tomorrow.
Uncertainty, enemy of business, they say.
Definitely, yeah. And people don't like uncertainty, do they? Sort of puts a bit of fear into them.
Europe, which sells everything from cognac to cars in the United States, had been bracing for the fallout, and President Trump certainly didn't disappoint.
Sell to Germany, we've got a job in the warehouse at the minute, it's going to Iceland.
But America's your biggest market, is it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
It's the middle of the night here in Europe, so there hasn't been a lot of public reaction. The little we've seen, though, is negative.
We will see a downturn in business on 10%. Not huge, but it will be down.
President Trump a little further down the road and actually get a carve out, a little bit of a pardon for the United Kingdom.
You may as well turn the lights out, back it up, you may as well go away. Just chipping away at the bits till there's nothing there. Everybody, regardless of what industry you're in, what you do, is now being affected by Donald.
You know, we've got 140 mouths to feed, and their respective mouths. So we've got to look at decisions that we make.
The insurance has gone up. The threshold at which you start paying it's gone down. The business rates have gone up. Power's gone up. Yeah, they're a bunch of idiots.
But Trump's tariffs, for some, could be the straw that broke.
Yeah, it will be the final straw.
We might be able to take advantage of going back to America because we lost out to Chinese. Could actually, look at going back to the States and saying, let's pick up where we left off. Is there an opportunity now for us to provide you with British made, or to actually come and make them in America? We're fortunate in a way that we are only 10% going into the States, although we did used to do a lot more with the States, so that might have been harder for us. Saying that, the current situation,
you may or may not like Donald Trump.
one thing that I want them to say is that they want to make Britain great again.
Trump has gone all the way up to 245%. It's a bit like those games of poker you see on TV.
Trump was swooning over anyone with a sexy accent.
But you have to admit, he's a brave man.
It marks a seismic change in the global order.
Who else would challenge the Chinese to a math face-off?
Singaporeans. I've said before that the world is changing in ways that will disadvantage small open economies like Singapore.
It's a question of who can throw up the bigger number.
The era of rules-based globalization and free trade is over.
He's going to tariff the UK at 10%, but he then went on to say that 10% is the baseline.
Recent Liberation Day announcement by the US leaves no room for doubt.
Americans are tricky. We don't trust them.
26% for India. So the government can, I think, in London, take comfort from the fact that it's done as well as any other.
It championed free trade and led efforts to build a multilateral trading system.
And he says the the US is charged an average of 10% by the UK, and he's charging the UK 10%. That's in contrast to tariffs of 20% on the European Union.
Protectionist and dangerous. For decades, the US was the bedrock for the free market economies of the world.
No, he has targeted friends of the United States with as much vigor and animus.
To be clear, the system is not perfect.
That this is going to result in money pouring into the United States, not just in the form of tariffs, which of course will be passed on to American consumers and will lead to rampant inflation.
We are entering a new phase.
President Trump has been reading out. He is absolutely determined.
This WTO system brought unprecedented stability and prosperity to the world.
So, this is the lowest tariff that the UK could possibly have expected to face, given that he's implementing across the board what he calls reciprocal tariffs.
Singapore and many others have long called for reform to update the rules and to make the system better.
Has got the pithiest comment so far on a text. What the F is he going on about? Well, I have three experts with me to answer that question, so I don't have to. Several of you are saying this is like the...
But what the US is doing now is not reform.
In terms of trade. And if you listen to what he was saying there about South Korea, about Japan.
So the direct impact on us may be limited for now, but there are wider and more profound consequences.
Will be those, I think, in European capitals who say we really do now have to recalibrate our relationship with the United States on the basis that as far as trade is concerned...
The US has placed Singapore in the lowest base tier with a tariff of 10%.
This is going to lead to a manufacturing boom in the United States because foreign exporters will realize that if they want to avoid the tariff...
It is abandoning the entire system it had created. Its new approach of reciprocal tariffs, country by country, is a complete rejection of the WTO framework.
There will be 25% on cars specifically as well. But yes, Downing Street, I think, will be really relieved at that.
If other countries adopt the same approach as the US, abandoning the WTO and trading only on their own preferred terms, country by country, it will spell trouble for all nations.
Yeah, I think so. And so that's 10% on everything, the minimum amount that we've seen of any of these tariffs that's been announced this evening.
We can also expect a strong global response to America's tariffs.
Happier than maybe they would have been earlier today. The idea that a lot of people were thinking it was going to be 25%, especially the point that Donald Trump has made about VAT, right? About it being 20% and that being...
The likelihood of a full-blown global trade war is growing.
Little better, I think, than many people were expecting. So yeah, I think that the Downing Street will be a little bit.
Singapore will take a bigger hit than others because of our heavy reliance on trade.
It's a bit of a win for the UK because, as you heard him announce there,
Singapore has decided not to impose retaliatory tariffs.
In many cases, he said, the friend is worse than the foe.
But other countries may not exercise the same restraint.
We do know that Donald Trump does put a lot of emphasis on things like this. And he told me when we were at that press conference they were working on this economic deal.
Trade wars escalated into armed conflict and eventually the Second World War.
Is actually going to benefit us. It's going to give us some relief from these tariffs. And you only have to look at some of the other people on that list, including the European Union, who...
The impact of the higher tariffs, plus the uncertainty of what other countries may do next, will weigh heavily on the global economy.
The reality is China's economy is still export-driven.
International trade and investments will suffer, and global growth will slow.
And I think it will just go to show that relationship that Keir Starmer has built up with Donald Trump.
No one can say how the current situation will unfold in the coming months or years.
It's crazy man. He's crazy Trump. And I believe he always changes his mind. I believe maybe 1 month or 2 months he will change his mind again.
But we must be clear-eyed about the dangers that are building up in the world.
By contrast, I think Israel is being tariffed at 17%.
The last time the world experienced something like this was in the 1930s.
But some of the other countries that are tariffed at 10% include Singapore and Chile.
International norms are eroding.
He said that Keir Starmer was a tough negotiator, that he was worth every penny that we were paying him. And we know that the UK government have had a bit of a flurry of diplomatic...
More and more countries will act based on narrow self-interest and use force or pressure to get their way.
And President Trump is literally saying there, the friend is worse than the foe. But
global institutions are getting weaker.
And if you looked at that chart that he was holding up there, and I've never been in a situation where I was literally sort of freezing the video here.
We will stay vigilant. We will build up our capabilities.
I think the key line that we heard from President Trump in the rather lengthy build-up to all of that was this one.
We are more ready than many other countries with our reserves, our cohesion, and our resolve.
I think in London tonight, and I know your other guests in the studio in London will opine on this, I suspect they will be breathing a bit of a sigh of relief that it's only 10% for the UK.
We will strengthen our network of partnerships with like-minded countries.
You were expecting, or from a United Kingdom point of view, it's on the good side?
This is the harsh reality of our world today.
Reports the fact that he's going down to 10%. That's a pretty good deal that we're starting.
We cannot expect that the rules which protected small states will still hold.
In the case of Canada, he's treating them far harshly than he's treating us.
But we must brace ourselves for more shocks to come. The global calm and stability we once knew.
As he has targeted foes of the United States and their...
Let us not be lulled into complacency. The risks are real and the stakes are high.
And if you look through the book, you'll see a direct correlation between the size of a country's entry and the tariff.
So that we will not be caught off guard.
It was more or less what we were expecting. So he waved around a book there, there's the National Trade
will not return anytime soon.
Estimate, which is the inventory of foreign country trade barriers.
I'm sharing this with you so that we can all be mentally prepared.
And the analysis that USTR has done is to look at all of those areas and to come up with an evaluation of the sort of tariff effect.
The road ahead will be harder. But if we stay resolute and united, Singapore will continue to hold its own in this troubled world.
That they receive. So he's obviously looked at three buckets. One is how open is your trade regime.
It's disappointing that the US has imposed these tariffs on steel and aluminium because we know that's in the best interest of UK businesses, and that's the kind of cool-headed, pragmatic approach that we're going to continue, where we engage closely and productively with the US.
Importantly, I think, lower the barriers.
That's the US with the potential to eliminate additional tariffs.
We actually did an exercise on the G20 where we looked at this, and actually we got very similar numbers.
A tree approach, could some people call it a weak response?
They got hard hit because their tariff structure is very high. It's relatively easy for them to look
toward an economic agreement, because we think that's in the best interest of British businesses and the British public to try and get that.
I think he said two things that are important going forward. One is if you want to lower the tariff.
So we're in a position where that negotiation is ongoing, and these global tariffs.
Lower the tariff, lower the barriers. And some of these developing countries that got very hard hit,
if you like, have landed in the middle of that work. So we don't want to be pushed off course by this. We want to carry on with our rapid negotiation.
There was much more to it than that. I think the next phase, all your relationships, all of those things, that becomes really important.
To recognise that these tariffs are global tariffs.
It's going to be much harder for the EU to eliminate the regulatory restrictions and so on.
Economic deal with the US to support British businesses and their trade with the US.
The UK, I think we've got a good chance now of a deal, but I think it's a pretty cold evaluation of countries' barriers and distortions, and I don't think...
and that is his mandate. Today, I will act in Britain's interests with mine.
Which have landed in the middle of our negotiations, as it were. So the negotiations that we're having with the US.
Today, last night, the President of the United States acted for his country.
They said if that tariff isn't removed by tomorrow at 12 o'clock.
Decisions we take in coming days and weeks will be guided only by our national interest.
Visa-free entry into China to go shop.
I understand how important this is for your businesses, as it is for the British people.
We're putting a 50% tariff on above.
So we move now to the next stage of our plan.
Offering 13% cash back on any purchases from American citizens. And
nothing else will guide me. That is my focus.
Is so outrageous, it's very hard to believe.
In the interests of our economy, in the interests of businesses around this table.
It was another huge morning for us where we woke up to what Donald Trump had said overnight and bam.
In the interest of putting money in the pockets.
China, as you know, against my statement, they put a 34% tariff on above what their ridiculous tariffs.
Both here and globally. But I want to be crystal clear.
Another big escalation. He essentially said that if China didn't withdraw its...
And clearly there will be an economic impact from the...
The only rational reply is to say, oh yeah? Well then we're tariffing you infinity plus one.
Decisions that the US has taken.
Escalating US tariffs from 10% to 20, then to...
Is our ability to keep a cool head.
Because numbers this high just start to lose all meaning.
We are prepared. Indeed, one of the great strengths of this nation.
145% tariffs on Chinese imports.
Because
nobody wins in a trade war. That is not in our national interest.
not only that, they're going to give you 280 hours of...
I said that in my first speech as Prime Minister, and that is how I govern.
54, then to 104, then to 145, and now presumably to 245.
That is how we have planned, and that is exactly what is required today.
8% tariffs on all Chinese imports.
The US bought close to $500 billion worth of Chinese goods last year.
We have a fair and balanced trade relationship with the US. Negotiations...
That's for all intents and purposes only a few steps away from declaring infinity tariffs, to which
China is refusing to negotiate with President Trump on U.S. tariffs. NBC's Janice Mackey-Frayer reports the move would not just be to blow to America's largest exporter.
But it's not entirely true. You can trace the confusion back to a White House fact sheet.
面对当前国际秩序
Well, that's a major line item that just got a whole lot bigger, right?
两国将同地区国家团结一致。
China is refusing to accept deliveries of Boeing jets. And
don't get me wrong, 245% is a real tariff.
In fact, the nation is taking the trade war to a new height.
和阵营对抗暗流，和经济全球化遭受冲击。 突破单边主义和共同抵御地缘政治，保护好亚洲家园的美好发展前景。当前国际秩序和经济全球化遭受冲击，保护主义逆流。
When some nations abandon the principles of shared responsibility and others question long-standing commitments. Multilateralism is under. They look outward, not inward. This
抗暗流，突破单边主义
overcome
not of rivalry, but of renewal.
Is in China's court. China needs to make a deal with us.
The tremendous strain.
With that tariff war raging,
China's global initiative offers a new lease on hope.
Kevin O'Leary, I think he's mostly right, but that doesn't...
Tariff measures are deeply regrettable.
We don't have to make a deal with them.
Explain Japan's position regarding the impact on Japanese investment and hiring.
Doesn't mean that he'll be right today or tomorrow, but
Meetings with Japan are a priority.
I do think we're heading in that direction, and he's clearly pointed it out.
Both in Japan and in the United States, and strongly requested that the U.S. review its series of tariff measures. So the talks with Japan are a priority. I think his presence is a clear sign of that.
Trump's tariffs are taking a wrecking ball to California's economy.
When Trump says that there are 70 or 100 countries in line for a meeting, there's
Trump claiming the president does not have the authority to impose tariffs.
no way the president can attend all of them.
At another level.
My understanding is that the U.S. is looking to make a deal in the next 90 days.
First at 11, yet another lawsuit coming from the state of California against the White House.
Following the onslaught of Donald Trump's 145% tariffs on Chinese goods.
The geopolitical impacts are outsized.
Between Beijing and Washington. Li Changgang's appointment is seen as a sign that Beijing is preparing for a tough period of
hitting the state harder than any other. And he says Trump's actions are illegal, claiming the Constitution makes clear that Congress is.
The appointment of Li Changang shows two things. Needs someone to help steer through those waters, but also that it is potentially preparing to, at some point, negotiate with the U.S. Now, why do I...
President Trump's trade war continues to cause chaos and confusion across the world. And tonight, Governor Newsom says enough's enough. He's still
appointed a new international trade negotiator following the outbreak of a devastating tariff war between has urged China to make a deal with the U.S.
One, that the Chinese government sees difficult waters ahead. And he's the former Chinese ambassador to the World Trade Organization in Geneva, and just the type of person you would want if you're the Chinese government. And you'll say that because he's a decades-long experienced trade negotiator. Donald Trump says the ball is now in China's court. He's wanting to sit down with the US and do a deal on trade. So where are we at with the trade war? Well,
it's hard to predict how this will shake out, but it's looking increasingly like the goal for the US is
said to his supporters that China needs to do a deal with us. Well, the Chinese government isn't behaving like it needs to do anything of the sort and is instead digging in.